Hi, you're joining us to talk about rural crime this week. I'm Eleanor Wood. I'm the Senior Public Affairs Advisor for the CLA. I'm joined by Lucy Charman, who's our Southeast Regional Advisor, and Claire Wright, who's our National Access Advisor, to talk about rural crime because it feels like we've had some rare good news this week with a government announcement for more funding for rural crime. Lucy, are you able to explain a bit more what we've heard?
Yeah, so we've had a really welcome announcement this week with over £800,000 being allocated to the National Rural Crime Unit and the National Wildlife Unit. So a really welcome announcement that there's some funding now going towards those units to really support the work that they've been doing to date. There's a bit of work going on. There's been a lot of work undertaken by the National Rural Crime Unit, really driving collaboration across force and pulling together data to look at serious organised crime across the UK. And the Wildlife Crime Unit will enjoy increased funding. The funding will go to support increased intelligence capabilities, working both in the UK and with Interpol.
Can you just explain what the Rural Crime Network actually does and what its main functions are?
Yeah, I mean, the unit was made up, was basically established in 2023 by Superintendent Andy Huddleston, who was supported by his local force to really centralise and look at collaboration across forces and to find a joint way of working, looking at specifically rural crime. So we've got obviously a variety of crime types, but they have sort of a priority series with livestock theft, livestock worrying, hare coursing, poaching, fly tipping. Crikey, Claire, you'll probably help me out with the last three. Agricultural theft, so machinery and construction machinery theft, and then vehicle theft. So those are sort of their key target areas, but they work cross-border and really target rural crime on a much more strategic basis than local forces can do, working with NAVSIS and other partners that really look at the crux of the crime and how to prevent it.
That's great. And you sit on the Rural Crime Network. What sort of things does that organisation do?
Yeah, so the National Rural Crime Network is a network of organisations that really aim to raise the profile of rural crime. So they look to inform and communicate best practice across both forces and PCCs, police crime commissioners, and also to obviously identify the key lobbying points to take to government in the fight against rural crime.
Thanks, Lucy. Claire, do you have any reaction to this announcement?
I mean, the uplifting funding is always welcome, but I think there is a slight disappointment that it could perhaps have been a much greater sum of money. As Lucy's already touched on, we're talking about serious organised crime. We're seeing rural crime becoming more prolific, more violent, and costing rural businesses much more money. So any additional funding to really tackle this scourge would be really welcome.
Yeah, I suppose just to sort of clarify, the funding will fund the rural crime coordinator, who is a single position. So it'll fund that and some vehicles for the National Rural Crime Unit to utilise over the year. But really, we would be looking for, a longer term pledge of funding to support that unit, because a lot of it is industry funded at the moment. So they receive £1.7 million worth of industry funding, as opposed to the 800 that's across both teams that they've just been awarded, which, don't get me wrong, it is fabulous that it's on the radar and there is a will from the government to recognise rural crime. But with the requirements and the need that there is to resource rural teams much better, it's a little short.
Okay. I spend my day job talking to politicians about this, and I think sometimes people can underestimate the threat of rural crime and the severe mental and emotional load it has on our members. Claire, could you give us an insight of the type of things you hear from our members who are up against rural crime?
Yeah, I mean, there's a real feeling in the members that I speak to that they are completely under siege. This uptick in violence, particularly this year when it comes to hair coursing, poaching, and theft offences. We've heard about farmers that have been run over by offenders and pretty much left for dead. We've had farmers surrounded by poachers in vehicles who have then attacked them with catapults, and we've had people assaulted with iron bars, and worst of all, we've had a gamekeeper spat at with bodily fluids, and the poacher then later claimed that he was HIV positive, which led to a really uncomfortable number of weeks waiting for the results of that test. We've seen the big hair coursing match that took place in Cambridgeshire, where farmers were pretty much left trapped on their own farms while these people ran roughshod. And there is this tendency that you tend to think of rural crime as just being, one for the pot or just stealing something to get by, but it's serious, it's organised, and it's affecting everybody on a daily basis.
I think probably not only on the daily basis, but it's the mental repercussions of being isolated. And a lot of farms are targeted time and time again. It's ongoing and relentless in a lot of cases. And crime types, it's not just the things that we spend a lot of time talking to members about. It's you're talking about night hawking or illegal off-roading vehicles that are damaging sort of heritage sites, fish poaching, machinery theft, metal theft, lead off church roofs. It all is classified as rural crime. So it's a huge picture that really needs some resource thrown at it.
So we need resource from a policing perspective. Is there anything that members can be doing themselves to protect themselves? Is there collaboration available? Or are we looking more at the structures for policing, Lucy?
So there's a lot that members can be doing proactively. For example, comms is probably the most important. WhatsApp is a controversial topic in the policing world, but the National Rural Crime Unit certainly recommend forces using WhatsApp as a comms between their officers and landowners. It's an essential tool, but that aside, any comms and reporting is imperative. We can't build a picture of rural crime until such time as there is reporting happening for every instance. So using 101 or Crime Stoppers, Neighbourhood Watch, or for something like fly tipping, using the Clear Waste app. All of those are mechanisms where at least the crime, it will be recorded, so we can start to build a much more universal picture. There are obviously security prevention measures, and CLA members can benefit from discounts with selected DNA, so marking tools and machinery with DNA marking, and site safe security solutions. So there's a cost, obviously there's a cost to a member in installing those, but in order to aid recovery of any stolen goods, it's highly recommended to mark that equipment.
Yeah, and I suppose it's worth mentioning that methods of regaining your stolen kit don't have to be that expensive. If cost is an issue, then at the very least photograph all of those items, particularly your small tools, and also make sure you've noted serial numbers, because there is nothing more frustrating that we hear from our police contacts is that they seize a lot of stolen goods that they suspect are stolen, and then if they cannot prove who the original owner was to reunite them, they have had to return those to the offender, and that is a real sucker punch. To see someone's precious chainsaws and other small equipment be returned to the person that you suspect was the original offender is just not a nice feeling. And you can also target harden on your farms. A lot of this won't be new to our members, but it's about making sure those gates are locked and double locked behind you when you finished your cultivations, and you can block up any entrances. You can get precast poacher blocks, which allow you to take farm machinery over them, but don't allow poachers' vehicles to access them. But you can also make them in a much more homemade fashion. So it could be an oil drum filled with concrete and secured with an iron bar. In all fairness, even a couple of Heston bales in a gateway can be enough to slow the poacher down and deter them. So there's lots of different solutions out there. And as Lucy was saying, collaboration, intelligence sharing between rural businesses and individual landowners so that you know where those suspicious vehicles are, who might be moving around in your district, and also just reporting everything that happens to police. In crime statistics, if it's not reported, it hasn't happened. So the police will act where they see real patterns of particular crimes and behaviour, but without that intelligence, they're really firing blind.
Thanks, Claire. I think that's a really fantastic point about reporting, because it's often we get pushback by politicians to say they don't have the data to understand that they need to take action. So reporting everything, even though it feels frustrating at the time, is more helpful in the long term. Talking of politicians and local support, how do you find the roles of PCCs have helped in local areas? Have they been a good point of contact for dealing with rural crime, Claire?
I mean, some of the ones that I've had dealings with, they've been very positive about addressing rural crime in their area, and they've been very good at supporting rural crime initiatives. But I think it's still quite a patchy picture across the country. I'm obviously based down the southwest, so that's my view, very skewed with very rural counties. So PCCs wanting to get elected have had to really focus on rural crime, whether Lucy's had some different experiences in her region.
Yeah, I think having come fresh from the National Rural Crime Network conference yesterday in London, where it's basically a gathering of force representatives, industry professionals, and PCCs. There is certainly a will from across the PCC network to improve things. But whether delivery is and funding quite matches the importance that we see is another matter. Certain areas I think deliver really well, and it's generally because the PCC has a personal interest in the rural outlook, and whether they're a landowner themselves or they've worked in rural practice before. So I think there's definitely a slight shift, but there's a lot of work to be done. And I know that our regional teams, the regional directors and the regional teams talking both at sort of rural crime team level, chief constable level, inspector level, or with the police crime commissioners, it's really important to keep banging the drum about rural resourcing. Obviously with devolution and the changes that we'll see with the PCCs, changing to mayors and deputy mayors, actually allocating funding, then I think there's a lot of lobbying to be done at a local level to ensure rural crime remains a top priority for the mayors as they come through.
That's great. Thank you, Lucy. So the Labour Party promised to bring forward a rural crime strategy. If you were able to write that strategy, what things would you both like to see put forward? Claire, should we kick off with you?
I think top of my shopping list would be a rural crime coordinator for every rural crime team, because at the moment there's a lot of opportunities are being missed. So it's either dragging people away from actual day-to-day frontline policing because they're busy doing administration, or they're missing intelligence patterns because they haven't got time to be sat at the desk picking those trends up. So having a coordinator to really help with all the admin tasks would be an absolute game changer. And that's certainly some of the messaging we've got back from our senior police contacts. But disappointingly, we still see that rural crime teams are not half as well equipped as the rural criminals. They're supposed to be out there fighting. So we'd really like to see a level playing field. And we have come up with a list of the absolute basic minimum that every rural crime team should have access to. And that's everything from the big ticket items such as a 4x4 with decent off-road tyres and a drone, right through to microchip scanners and thermal imaging scopes and night vision, which are all tools that the poachers have access to. So it seems absolute madness that we're sending out our rural crime teams very often without even an appropriate torch into dark rural communities.
Great. And what would be your top asks, Lucy?
I mean, aside from funding, which to improve the physical number of feet on the ground, and as Claire said, not only data a rural crime coordinator, but a data analyst for each force, and if not, some kind of parity of data collation so that crime stats can actually be built, because at the moment recording doesn't allow, the way that each crime type is recorded across each individual force doesn't allow for a national picture. So I think data, the understanding of data, and the prioritization needs addressing.
On that topic, because one of the things we're finding is that police are able to work more effectively and be more efficient because of developments in modern technology that have happened over sort of the last 5 to 10 years. So in the past, if you wanted to train a force wildlife crime officer, they actually had to go away to a physical course and sit in a classroom. And now there's been a move by the National Wildlife Crime Unit to put all of those modules online so that more officers can access them and access them at a time that suits them. And so there should be more expertise flowing down into the forces, which is absolutely brilliant news.
That is fantastic news. So I think overall our view is this is good news. This funding is very much welcome, but please go further, and we need better equipment, better resourcing, more data. But we at the CLA are going to continue pushing governments at all levels to keep going on rural crime, because it is something that affects you, our membership. Thank you.
Thanks.